Life isn't perfect, and neither are we.
Nope. But we know how to face our fears
And have some fun.
and talk about all the messiest things of life.
Like the messiest things.
Get connected to yourself, get connected to others, and get connected to the life right in front of you.
This is The Connected Life with Justin and Abby.
That's me.
That's you.
And you.
Hey, friends, before we kick off this week's episode, we got a little surprise for you.
Yeah, we are doing a conference on boundaries for free. We want to invite you.
What?
I know. We want to invite you to come learn about boundaries while we have none. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. But we want you to be able to be a part of it. We have a school, the Life Consulting Masterclass. It's a 3-year program. And every year we do conferences where there's a deep dive on different subjects. And this year we're inviting you to join the school for the conference on boundaries.
Yeah,
it'll be interactive. It'll be fun. It'll be empowering.
Yeah, it's going to be a really good time. And it's October 18th and the 19th, Friday and a Saturday. All you have to do is go to Justin and Abby, that's abi.com/boundaries. And you can get all the extra details there. You can sign up for it. We'll send you a little something in your email. And check your spam.
You have to respond. You have to get the email and respond to it to be able to come. Because last time, all the links got lost in spam.
Yeah. So go check out that spam folder if you don't find it right away after you hit send.
Yeah.
Okay. So, hey, without further ado, here's the episode you're wanting to watch.
Welcome to Not My Podcast with Justin and Abby.
Oh, it's Jenna Zint.
Thank you for having me on your podcast. I'm so grateful to be here.
You could return the favor and have us on your podcast.
I'll have my people call your people.
Okay, fair enough.
Can you come to my little kitchen table where we may or may not have Play-Doh on the table at the same time?
Perfect.
So, okay.
That's perfect for ADD.
To be fair, you've invited us on it, and we've rejected your offer repeatedly by just not responding.
By just not responding.
It's a boundary, and I respect it.
Well, today we are talking about boundaries in a series with Jenna. She is brilliant about thinking about boundaries, and she's been so self-aware and self-reflective, and one of the most balanced, boundaried humans I've met. And that is just so rare to see boundaries done well. Oftentimes boundaries are weaponized and used against people as like swords.
And it's you versus me versus even like we talked about the collaboration. Sorry, I just hijacked it for real that time. I got excited.
I know. It's so true. Well, I was thinking about a lot of sessions I've done with clients are based around people are trying to figure out how bad is this other person? Because if I can decide they're bad enough, I'm allowed to have a boundary. And a lot of people don't want to have compassion for others because compassion for others means they're not allowed to have boundaries.
Wow.
They don't want to forgive others because they think if I forgive you, then I'm not allowed to have boundaries. And we are designed to need boundaries. It is a healthy need.
Yeah.
And without boundaries, our soul suffers. And again, without boundaries, of course, I'd have to hold on to unforgiveness because you may not be safe to be close. Or without boundaries, of course, I have to decide you're the bad person. If that's the only way I'm allowed to put up some space between me and people, then I have to do a lot of dysfunctional things. And so you are so good at not villainizing people, but taking ownership for yourself. And so we have here on the show today, we're going to talk about the extreme ways that people create boundaries and then a more of a balanced middle ground approach that people could do. So Jenna, what is it that when you think about boundaries, what is the goal of them for you?
Well, I think it's honestly, I keep going back to this picture more recently of like my garden, my heart being a garden, which sounds odd, but like what keeps growing when I'm around this person. So I think it's so much easier to point at what they're doing versus what's happening inside of me. So I'm like, oh, this is actually like something in me this isn't working because bitterness anger keeps, like I'm losing self-control. So I need to adjust something because like, I think we get so caught up in what they're doing versus like, actually, I can't control you. So my energy would be better spent looking at what I can control, and I'm losing grip on self-control. Therefore, I'm going to do some adjustments because I care about how I show up.
Yes.
So I think you're making it me And like, yes, you have action, but I'm always in control of me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when we feel powerless, is when we feel like we can't control us. So like, actually my goal is to do a good job of controlling me, so I show up how I want to be, like in love and compassion. And even what you said, I love what you said about a lot of times when forgiveness is required, sometimes like you said, I can't forgive them or I don't have a boundary. I think I came on the line of, when I forgive them, then I'm supposed to be no boundaries, because that's what forgiveness looks like.
Is I just give you free reign again.
Yes, where it's like, no, actually, like, to have bitterness and offense not keep popping up, this is actually what's going to be needed. But that's my goal, to like protect love versus like, I don't know. It almost feels like the goal, I actually think of it sometimes too, where there's like a seasonality. Like for this point in my current journey of health, where I'm at and healing and wholeness, this is what I have to be able to not be bitter, angry, whatever. But my goal is constantly to be growing in health.
Yes.
So like coming back in the next season and assessing like, oh, do I have more to give? Could I actually, like, if my boundary is like teeny tiny, what I have to give you, like next year, is it a little more? And I think most of the times when I do it well, I don't actually know that I have ever stalled out. Like it's this process. So instead of thinking like this is forever, or this is the new terms of our relationship, like the seasonality helps me honestly make it not high stakes. Because I think a lot of times we think it's high stakes, and that's why it feels scary. So I'm like, for now, this is what I need. We'll see next fall where we're at, but there's actually like not an urgency to cast the forever future forecast. Like, this is what I need right now. Maybe it'll change. Let's hope it changes. It should change, because I'm growing and healing.
Right. I love that analogy. I love boundaries being more about like, what do we need to do to have self-control over us? When I visualize boundaries, when they really started to connect for me, one time I heard this story about like, boundaries are supposed to be gates, not walls, and they're letting people in closer to you, not pushing people out. And that like, I was like, that sounds nice metaphorically. But what I really understood boundaries the most is when I learned my window of tolerance. So the simplest way that I would describe my window of tolerance is there's a green zone where I am my best self. I'm regulated. I am creative. I'm playful. I believe the best about people. My relationship circuits are on. I'm able to connect to people. When I start to go into fight or flight, that's the red zone for me. So I start to get faster. I get busier. There's a lot of things I do. Basically, fight or flight is I mobilize to feel safe. And then if I start to go into freeze, it's I slow down to feel safe. I withdraw to feel safe. And so both, like, so it's like the green zone's in the middle, the red zone is up because you zip up into it. The blue zone is down because you like submarine slowly down into it. And I'm watching, how do I stay in my green zone in life? Because when I'm in my green zone, I have self-control. I have bandwidth. So a great example is when I'm in my green zone, if Justin says, hey, can you help me put these dishes away right now? I typically have margin. I have margin to say, sure, I can, even though that wasn't what my plan is. If I'm outside my green zone or on the edge of my green zone, and he's like, can you interrupt what you're doing to do this? I might be like, no, I can't. I have all these things I have to do. And the idea is I get snappier. I get more frustrated. I am no longer responding out of my authentic love place when that starts to happen. And so I am trying to maintain, how do I stay in my green zone? So in marriage, boundaries, and we haven't gotten to the extreme boundaries yet, but just talking about how I view boundaries in relationship, like in our marriage, if we're having a conversation, I'm going to make boundaries around my green zone. So if I start to feel like I'm getting triggered and threatened towards my red or my blue, I'm going to say, hey, can we put a pause in this? Can we go for a walk? I need to go have some downtime. I need to regulate. We didn't know we were allowed to have boundaries like that in the beginning of marriage. And that caused so much distress, because when we weren't in our window of tolerance, you don't have compassion and empathy when you're not in your window of tolerance. Your window of tolerance is basically like, I'm open to connection and relationship. And the red and blue zones is like, I'm shut down towards connection, or my relationship circuits are off, or I'm edgier. I'm in survival. That's the word I was looking for. I'm in survival mode if I'm not in that. And so for me, I'm looking at my best self is giving my green zone to the people around me? And how can I maintain doing that? Does that mean, and when I start to drift out of my green zone, that means that I need to figure out a way to set a boundary to come back to it. Now, whether that could be like, maybe we hang out and the hangout just goes too long, and I have like a certain amount of social capacity and I love being around people. And then the time I start to fade out of my green zone, I start to get anxious or anxiety, or I
Feel
start to get ADD or feel trapped. So that's when you know I need to figure out a way to set a boundary. Now, we're talking about extreme boundaries in this. And so what most people do is they set like extreme boundaries. Like, I'm never hanging out with that person again because they stayed too long.
Yeah. And I gave them all these subtle clues and they knew what, like, you know, I had an early morning. It's them. You know, it's like them. And you're like, oh, okay. What about, what's another option?
Yes.
It's funny that you mentioned that.
Can I add something on that? Because you talked about right at the beginning, them versus me, right? And when it's about them, there's not really much room for creative solutions, right? Because
you can't control them.
Right. My only creative solution really is to try and control them or remove them. It limits all kinds of solutions right there. So I love that and I think you're about to jump into that, is how we actually get to create all these creative solutions versus like, just get out of my house. I'm never having you over ever again.
First and final invite. Yeah. Oh, that's so true. It almost reminds me, I don't know if I've heard y'all say it, but like the idea that if you have a trigger, instead of looking at other people who hit your trigger, noticing why do I have a trigger, getting curious about why that button's in you.
Yes.
That's what I kind of feel like, even with boundaries, noticing patterns. Like, oh, when people stay past an hour and a half, that's a Jenna thing. Whether or not like some people naturally go or some people naturally stay, Jenna's capacity is actually like Jenna's trigger. So I think like not blaming them for patterns I notice arising, but then I get to be even preemptive with knowing like, oh, an hour and a half is about my limit. So it's actually not about them anymore. I know that I'll schedule things for an hour and a half or less. Actually 45 minutes walking, my sweet spot. Like, I can see you every week. If it's 2 hours coffee, I can see you every 6 months. You know,
totally.
Like I feel anxious thinking about getting trapped in a coffee shop. But yeah, so I have with I actually do have a window of tolerance, like you were saying about people staying, and I dubbed them stayers for a while because I'm like, when I was like pointing my finger at other people, like, this is your problem, you're not taking social cues. I think that's a good like hint for me when you're going into boundaries with a list of what they're doing. It's no longer the right frame. I think that's when it's like, oh, that's when it's punishment.
Yes.
My goal with a boundary is not to punish them. It's actually to make me, like you said, stay where I'm compassionate, self-control. So if I become like my list of them, then I'm not actually functioning out of that, and it has become punishment versus like this protecting love and compassion. So anyways, noticing like, okay, they're stayers. That actually speaks more to Jenna having a limited capacity. So what can I do? So now I tell people usually the window, like, hey, would you like to come from 6 to 8? Would you like to?
Which is so relieving.
Oh, it's so like really clear, defined.
On both sides. Like if you know, like, oh, I don't even have to worry about when I'm going. She said 8 o'clock. I'm walking out at 8 o'clock.
And then people, it's funny though, because I've had people be like, it was shocking to me at first being friends because like you gave us an hour. You said you were busy and you had an hour 15, and like you said goodbye at an hour and 15. And most of the time it's because like we're not jerks of people. We also have a lot of things. So a lot of times I'm like, if you stay late,
and a lot of things you're doing,
my kids are going to get to bed late. I'm going to have grumpy kids all day tomorrow. And then I'm going to avoid hanging out with you because I'm going to subtly associate the consequences of me not keeping my boundary for potentially hurting your feelings.
That's good.
They said that they were like a little confused and maybe hurt at first. And I know that when I have like specific time frames like that might happen. But I just communicate, like a lot of times I'll be like, thank you so much for coming. We'd love to do it again. Like if that's the case, or I watch them maybe potentially getting triggered, I just feel like I can be really empathetic and soothe that part of them. Like, thanks, we're going to go like explain what we're doing or transitioning, but it doesn't mean I don't hold it. I don't feel triggered. I don't change my boundary based on their emotional reaction. I know that most people will have some level, but I know it sounds silly. Expecting people to have an emotional reaction doesn't derail me when they do.
Yes.
Because sometimes
like if
I
you
get bitter.
accept, I'm going to have a boundary, that's going to trigger people.
Yes.
And if I don't have a boundary, I'll start to hate them or slowly walk away and never see them again.
Yeah.
So loving them is allowing them. And you have a saying in your house, I think, just because you're sad doesn't mean I'm
We
bad.
use this all the time with boundaries. I was going to say, yep. Like they might be sad. That doesn't mean I'm bad. But then my follow-up is I can be soft. And like if they need to tell me they're hurt, that's what I'm really good at repairing and assuring them that even though they didn't enjoy encountering my boundary, it doesn't mean that like I don't have a value for them. If they want to tell me, like we can tell me, but I won't go into judgment towards myself for having a boundary. But with stayers now, the other thing I'll do is there's certain folks who like just won't leave. Like I have some friends, I feel like they're not alone. And I'm like, I don't understand. I left my house. I remember this one time. I left my house for an hour and a half. Nobody was home, but this person. They stayed.
What?
And I was like, I came back in and they were eating stuff too. And I was like, I'm so confused. And we didn't even live in our own home. We were living with Aaron's parents. There's so many levels. And I had asked them to go and then they had reasons why they weren't going. I literally could not get this person out. So now there's a couple people that like, if they don't respect the boundaries, it's not like most of the time I won't not be friends with them. I will, I public places. Aaron knows. He's like, are they a public place person? So I'll meet at a park. We'll go out to dinner. But like that way I can leave when we're done. When the amount that we allotted in our schedule has hit, then we'll move on to the next thing.
Well, and what I love that you're describing is I'm going to find ways for me to be powerful. You can't take my power from me. Even your behavior can't take my power from me.
So true.
Like, so what you're creating it where you're not a victim to them, because what happens is we start to build a fence when we feel like we are powerless to someone. We start to get angry and try to reclaim some of our autonomy when we feel like they are purposefully hurting us or they are purposefully running over our boundaries. And so what you're doing is like, no, I always have something that I can do. You talked about this in the last one. I'm not going to drive with somebody so that I can leave when I feel like I want to leave.
It's so true. I like what you said though. I actually literally, that's my self-talk. I always am powerful. I can always be in control of myself because this, especially when you're young and maybe had an environment where you were like the power was taken away and decisions were made for you. I have to remind myself, therefore I'm not proving it with my actions. Because when I'm acting through it, that's when I get big or that's when I break connection first. But I think of it as kind of self-soothing. Like when I don't like what they asked or like they asked too much, I'm like, hey, you actually aren't at the mercy of their ask. You're powerful. Let's decide what you have to give. But I don't judge that part, but I really do have to soothe it sometimes. Like I feel anxious when people make big asks or like, I don't know, just against something I want to do. And I'm like, hey, you actually get to choose. You could say no. Oh, I could say no. Like, okay.
Even the ability to say no makes you resent people less. Like if we feel like we have to do what people want or we have to meet them in their needs, then we will resent them. Yeah. But if we know I can say no and that's fine. I can leave when I want to and that's fine. Like almost sometimes I become a slave. I give my power away when I decide I have to do this to make them happy. It's like, is all of my life based on making them happy? And what I've started to do is making them happy for this moment or making them feel consistently loved through our relationship more important. So like, if I stay at this party the whole time, but I hate it, but it makes them happy, but then I start to have resentment towards them and it builds up, then that creates where I'm actually not keeping my love on towards them.
Oh, that's so good.
Yeah. I've noticed that we talked about the no's and I've gotten really good at expressing no's and boundaries and blunt, very direct. And I had to get that way because I was very passive in my communication before, again, because I didn't want to hurt feelings, but then I was hurting feelings because I was becoming bitter, resentful, passive aggressive in behavior like that. And I did notice you talked about people kind of being shocked, maybe offended. And I can imagine a lot of people, the reason that we don't actually express boundaries is, that terror inside of us, right? Like they're going to be so offended and they're going to hate it and it's going to be miserable. But as I got really comfortable with people having painful experiences, bad emotions and stuff like that, my no's became a safety to a lot of people. So what I started seeing is that people would come to me and be like, when you first said no or were very direct about what you did or didn't want on stuff, I was like, I'm a little offended at this. Yes. And then I realized, oh my gosh, nobody is direct with me and honest with me in my life. And now I always know where I stand with Justin because he's not secretly hiding feelings towards me. He's being so direct towards me.
Yeah, people are like, I know if I'm at your house, and you don't want to hang out anymore, you will leave.
You will literally, I will literally tell people, I don't want to hang out anymore, or I'm going to go to bed now. It was great having you. I need you to leave, or things like that.
Or you'll say, I've hit my wall.
Yeah.
You guys can stay as
You
long
can
as
stay
you
as long
want.
as you want. Watch that TV, but I'm going to go in my bedroom and I'm going to go to bed, right? You know, like there's stuff like that. And so I know that the people who really don't like it found a way to exit my life.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that was what was relieving about it, is I didn't have to kick somebody out of my life. It was, I hold healthy boundaries enough and they go, I don't like it. I don't like it. And I'm not going to come over anymore. Great.
Yeah.
But then the people who maybe didn't like in the beginning adjusted to it.
Absolutely.
It became a new normal. And as they
relieving.
saw that you could set, I think, again, the fear is we only saw boundaries as kids when love was removed.
Correct.
And so
That's so good.
we're so terrified of a boundary, meaning you'll never invite me over, or you don't like me, or you're rejecting me, or you're saying you don't like me. When people see that a boundary can be set and you still love them and you invite them over again, yes.
Yeah, all of a sudden they're like, this is awesome. I feel so safe in this relationship.
Yeah, people know that your yes is a yes.
Yeah.
So people know if you're hanging out with them, you're willing to do it because you also will say no.
Yep.
That's so good. I like what you said though about almost like the nuances of making someone happy versus loving someone. And I think we get those mixed up a lot.
So good.
Especially in Christianity. Like, like you not having, and pain, like causing someone pain feels so different to me than I can have a boundary. Like I put this on the table. I was thoughtful. I'm not actually haphazard. There's no hidden judgment. I'm not hoping this hurts you. But if you pick it up and you have an negative emotional reaction, I can't control that.
Yeah.
So I get to control how I put it on the table. And I am I feel like I am responsible for like taking judgment,
how you
blame.
do it.
Yeah. Not being a victim, not being punishment, but then being okay if they have a negative reaction versus I inflicted pain. Like almost this, I would almost make myself more able to control them. Like get on their side of the fence and be like, dag, like, wait, that wasn't in my heart at all.
Yeah.
If that happened, we could chat about it. But like, it's not me loving them poorly. Like if they're only being happy is a reflection of me loving them, then I'm like a monkey forever because they like, that's not a fair dictation of what love looks like.
Well, and you're making a point there, which is we have to assess what our definition of love is, each of us, because we all have a different definition of love. We also have a different definition of what being a good person is, because that usually comes into play. Am I being because the majority of human beings want to be a good person.
Yeah, we want to do good and be good.
Right. And so we're assessing, am I being a good person in this? And we have to come up with a value system and a definition of these things that helps us to foster boundaries, because there's a lot of times there's a broken definition that actually hinders us from holding good boundaries, right? It's like loving people means that we never let anyone feel bad emotions. Yeah. Okay, that will cause me to never have good boundaries. And I have to ask, what is the result of that? Like Abby started talking about the resentment and the bitterness and the stuff that builds. We have to ask, does my version of love, like when I play it out in the long term, what are the long-term effects of that, both inside of their heart and inside of mine? And so when I look on the long term of like, my definition of love is leading to me to being very bitter and resentful over here 6 months down the road with this stayer.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I have a stayer that comes to my house and I'm bitter and resentful 6 months down the road because I won't ask them to leave the house, or I won't set time frames for my own well-being. And I'm like, clearly that doesn't align with love. So I think that that's a huge thing that we need to do, which is reassess and redefine.
And I think that our wrong definitions of boundary is where we swing from extreme to extremes, and we get very black and white. And it makes sense because when we are triggered, we go into black and white thinking. So triggered thinking is survival, and survival is think fast and make a decision fast. You know, like survival, our primitive survival instincts are like run from the lion, you know, run from danger. And so we're instantly making a decision, and we can't afford to see gray when we're in survival. We can't afford to look through all the nuance and to think through all the scenarios. It's just got to be fast. So when we're triggered, we often see like it's no boundaries or it's a huge boundary.
Even like parenting, you know how many times you'll be like, no TV for a year because you're so mad. And then you're like,
Yes.
oh, wait, that doesn't actually, I should think through. What can I say what I do
Yeah.
when I realize? I actually often will say, I got really comfortable being like, internally be like, oh, I didn't like that. I don't know what the like adjustment for my boundary to be, but this won't work for me. But actually being okay with, sometimes I need to communicate it. Like it was more with my mom, like, hey, that really hurt. I'm feeling like majorly triggered, so I don't trust myself to not make a mess.
Right.
I think I'm gonna call you tomorrow and figure out like
Yes.
what, like we're gonna talk about it again. So versus like I thought I always had to solve it now. Like so untangling
Yes.
the urgency of like ouch,
Mhm.
punch, or ouch,
Mhm.
run. Be like ouch. I don't know what to do about that ouch. But I don't have to. I'm going to let you know. I almost would tell myself because I'm avoidant. So I wouldn't necessarily bring it up if I could secretly ouch and then just like create
Mhm.
distance with safety. I was like, actually, I'm going to say that hurt. I don't know exactly what I'm thinking or feeling, but I'll probably need to have another conversation. I do this with my husband
Mhm.
with like, or even when the kids cross the boundary, I'm like, oh, you know, blah, blah, blah. I don't know what. They're like, what are you going to do, Mom? I'm like, I don't know yet. Because I'm triggered. You're lucky. I will tell them this, but I'm like, you're lucky I'm not choosing right now. Because
Totally. It'd be
but
a
I'm like,
horrible choice.
I'll let you know. So it's like okay to say I don't know, but like ouch, I didn't like that. Let my prefrontal cortex turn back on, and then I'll go
Yes.
make a much better decision in 2 hours, 3 hours.
Absolutely. Tell us, Jenna. Okay, so you have an analogy about a fence
Yeah.
and boundaries.
Well, even like you're saying, swinging from extremes. So like I went from the buffet that never had rolls because everyone could take as many rolls and fried chicken as they wanted. I don't know what, my Golden Corral 1990s
Absolutely. I
childhood.
was following you there.
Those rolls.
The
I was
soft
thinking Golden
serve
Corral.
with the sprinkles.
Yes,
Do you remember that?
I would put gummy bears on it. Yes,
Oh,
same,
yeah.
same.
Mm.
But so I went from the other extreme to like, oh, like I could actually I can say no. So then it was like the hitting people with the toy, but I felt like I was more like, let me show you my no.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
You're almost like you're all out to get me. Like I will, like, you don't get anything. I know that now I don't have to give you, so you're getting nothing. So internally, I realized that.
And you kind of like start, when people start boundaries, exactly what you're saying, they are responding to every person that they didn't set a boundary with in their entire
true.
life. They're like, I will never go to church again, and I will never help anyone again, and I'll never help clean people's houses when they're sick, and all like you just shut down
or
everything.
all family events, or talk to my dad, or it's so I think like recognizing, I think of the best boundary, like almost the ones that are the most. I actually recognize this, my friend Michelle at first, is I would suggest something and then we'd end up over there and I'd be like, wait, how did I get over here? And I was like, oh my gosh, I just encountered like 4 boundaries. But she was so soft and nice about it that it was like the negotiation that we talked about. So I always think like a boundary that's done too, I'm learning how to be powerful, is like a chain link fence with barbed wire on the top.
The like circle of it, yes.
You're saying you want me here and this is supposed to protect connection, but this feels like you are the problem, keep you out.
Yes.
Versus the analogy that I want is that like in Ireland where they have all those like those like hundreds and hundreds of year old rocks that were covered in like green. I'm like, oh, it's clear, like, oh, that's the entryway over there. I'm gonna have to maybe walk like an acre to get over there, but I see where you want me to go, but I don't feel like, I feel like I'm still invited in versus chain link fence. So I'm like, okay, you can have a boundary without it being offensive or off-putting. Like you can actually present it in a way that it's clear that I want relationship versus you're the enemy. I'm trying to not let you get in.
What would be some examples of boundaries like that?
Oh my gosh. Well, I was thinking about this. When I get on an airplane, before I would like, it was like I call this like black or white mentality, all or nothing. We just polarize it where we learn and then we go to the other extreme and then it's like, okay, what's the gray? So I used to like not, when I realized I could have a boundary, not talk to anyone. I was like, I want to be quiet. I want to watch a show. Like I don't stranger. I don't actually know you. And I don't know that I care where you're going or why you're going there.
Headphones the minute you get on the plane.
Absolutely.
So true. So then I would do that. And then when I realized like, oh, I think I'm overcompensating, I went to the other extreme and truly like, you didn't know what Jenna was going to get on the plane, because then the other extreme, Jenna, was that I'd become best friends with the people. I'm not exaggerating. Multiple phone numbers exchanged. I get Christmas cards from 2 people that I've met on airplanes.
Shut up.
Still. And it was when like Rosie who's 7 was born. So I'm like, we've been friends for a while. So I just had it was so black or white. It was like, I'm not going to talk to you or we'll actually be friends for life. There's no in between. So now what I do, and I'm like, oh, actually, I wonder, I just start, when I get so ingrained, I feel like the reason I'm showing up that way is I don't know another option. So I actually, when I'm just trying to warm myself up to being another option, I will say like, I wonder if, or what if, it doesn't have to be this way. So it feels like this like wading in the pool versus like jump in the deep end, Jenna. You know, like I'm not there yet. What if I'm just opening up? So now I'm like, what if there's another way? What if I could actually communicate kindly, but not give more than I want to? And if they don't seem like someone I want to have a longer conversation, I'm not, you know, pigeonholed into it, nor do I have to pretend like there's not a living body next to me,
right.
you know? So I'll usually like say whatever level of small talk, ask maybe where they're going. And then I'll usually purposely drop a comment about being a mom and being like so grateful that like alone time starts when it feels like a spa to be able to be alone on the airplane. And they're like, oh yeah, usually they doing it in such a way, they'll be like, girl, get it, like enjoy your time. And then they'll get their book out. I'm like, oh my gosh, there is an in between. It's not like best friend or ignoring.
Well, I think one of the only ways in betweens work is if you have a plan.
Yes, I was going to say that.
Because you have to feel like you have something powerful you can do if people don't pick up on cues.
Yes.
And so it's a very applicable example. I was laughing because I'm like, I have so many times that I did either or. Headphones in before I even got on the plane, or talk to them the entire time and be fully engrossed.
We're the same person sometimes.
I know. It's very true. And so I was thinking, for me, one of the things I've learned, I mean, this is a realistic boundary. I get sick when I'm looking at somebody on the plane and talking. Something about turning my head.
Like this.
Yeah.
Entire podcast.
We thank you for your service.
Making you car sick also. But so I'll warm up and then I'll say, hey, I need to put my headphones on and watch this show or read my book. I can't read books because I get motion sick, but because I get motion sick and it's helpful for me to concentrate on something. So I need to wrap this up. Something like that. But what I do is I premeditate boundaries and I come up with them before I'm in the situation, because in situations I can never come up with a boundary.
And you feel powerless or you get really powerful and I mean, that's what I do.
Yes. And so, and I often so I either get stuck or sound crazy. But I know that you do a lot of boundaries without even saying that they're boundaries. So how does that work?
I kind of goes back to that negotiation concept of like, they'll tell me what they want. And then I'm like, oh, okay. There's part of me that actually flares. I'm like, I have to fulfill their short order menu. I'm like, no, actually, what do I have to give? And then I actually will remind myself, like, don't betray your capacity, which is helpful. Like, what do I have to give? And I totally forgot your question. Welcome to ADD in action. I was thinking maybe it would come. It didn't.
Yeah. Oh, that was a good lead in. I do that all the time. I was just asking, when you don't always like saying I'm setting a boundary, which I think is really great, because I think when people hear I'm setting a boundary, they automatically go into anxiety and panic.
Yeah.
Because it feels like what's happening and what's going to happen.
What did I do?
What
Why
do you
am
do
I bad?
instead?
Oh, yeah. So I actually, I think it usually is childish. Like, I'm setting a boundary, blank, blank, blank. Yes. Instead, I'm like, I think about, like you said, I premeditate it. It's usually thought of like what I do and don't like, knowing my own triggers, my own capacity. And then I just tell them what like our choices are. Like, I could do this or this. I make it about me. I don't say what I don't like about them or what doesn't work for them most of the time, because that would be judgment and triggering. Yeah. But I give them options, and then I let them know what I'm going to do. So I'm like, I wouldn't be able to do that. I could do blah, blah, blah. So it feels way less harsh.
I'm setting a boundary against you wanting to spend 2 hours at a coffee shop every week with me.
Yes.
You're like, oh, I can't do that, but I could do a 45-minute walk.
Yes. Yeah. So I'll give them an alternative. I think it's really just makes, when someone says like, I'm setting a boundary with you, the message that it's so hard to not hear is you're the problem. I need protection from you versus I'm trying to manage me.
Well, and also, I personally would never use the language. Rarely would I ever use the language, I'm setting a boundary. Yeah. It's the action, like you said, like, oh yeah, this is what I have the capacity for, right? This is what I want to engage or whatever. You're telling them without telling them it's a boundary. You're just saying your capacity. But I think going back to, people will throw that out in a childish I'm setting a boundary. And again, because like you said, people have said that so often in such almost harsh and intense ways that boundaries do feel like we're being punished.
Yeah.
And so as we're having this conversation, I think that we have to ask ourselves, have I felt punished by the idea of a boundary? And was what I experienced, was it an actual boundary? Or like, because we have to,
we have
to almost like let our judgments and our offenses towards boundaries go, especially if we've seen them modeled in a terrible way.
Yeah. I think that's really true. I've had a lot of boundaries where people are just it's like cold and black and white, and there's no getting around it. And it's like, it feels like they're throwing a huge wall at you. And most of the time they're not open for negotiation.
And that's where you get to go, okay, that's not a boundary. That right there is not a boundary. That's someone
breaking connection,
stonewalling, things like that, right? Or their broken attempt at a boundary.
One of my own personal things too is that, like you said, like often I realize I need a boundary because I'm getting triggered and highly emotional. So before I go have a conversation, if I can, like, because usually like I do a retroactive, I'm like, ouch, didn't like that, need some adjustments, not going to figure out in the moment. I don't have to, I can like go figure it out later often if I haven't premeditated through it. But then I remind myself that I actually, if it's not punishment, I have to not have offense and anger towards them. So before I'll have the conversation, I actually forgive them and like deal, like almost feel like I sweep up and clean up in here, because I've had other people that maybe even softly presented a boundary, but I can tell
it is with their anger.
And it is punishment. And I'm like, oh, so I also think we're just so responsible for our heart postures. Like in the idea of like radical ownership, I'm like, oh, you might get sad, but if I'm doing the work 9 times out of 10, I can't say always, but if that's my heart to always do the work first, even if you feel punished, I know that it's not in my heart because I cleaned it up before I brought it to you.
Yes.
So I think giving yourself space is helpful.
Well, and I love what you're saying. Like, how do I forgive this person? How do I process and let go and find a way that I can still relate to them? Do you have any stories of that?
Of letting go and forgive? Yeah. Probably. I had some friends, actually, my small group for a while, we met a lot, and I have kind of a commitment phobe in general that I'm recovering from.
Totally.
And it was like the commitment we needed and how often, and it would go endless hours. It'd go like 4 or 5 hours. And then I started waking up early. So finally realizing that I felt like I could only be there. Stealing from me. I felt totally bitter. And then realizing like, I've actually never had I've said like, I'm tired. I've said these things, but I've never adjusted or held something to them. And I
just want to stop you there, because a lot of people have decided they had a boundary by saying I'm tired. Or I had a boundary by like giving social cues that people like should mind read. I had a relationship.
Clearly knew that was a boundary.
Yeah.
My cue.
I had a roommate once that said, oh, these apartments are opening up in January. And I was like, oh, that's cool. And then they got angry at me later because they were like, I told you needed to move out. And I was like, when did you tell me I needed to move out? And they're like, when I told you the apartments were opening up. And so I'm just noticing like, even in what you're saying, so often we're so scared of boundaries that we do those little cues like I'm tired. And then we get mad when people don't mind read the cues that we're sending.
Yeah.
And we think we're so blatant, or even I think realizing how our words can mean something so different to someone else's.
Yes.
And you're like, that's not what I said or meant. And like, well, that's what they heard. So actually just being so clear. So I had to like go through like and I also felt a bit of a pressure. If I quit my small group ever, I'm failing. So then I felt mad that I felt powerless
I have to stay in this
as long as they want. Yeah, and I'm going to be exhausted the next morning. And I'm like, oh, actually, so real, like walking through, I think like this, I think it's just helpful when you're by yourself to untangle like, oh, that was mind reading. Oh, that was judgment. Oh, that was blame. Oh, this actually hurt. It like is so much clearer to almost like unpack my suitcase and be like, okay, that part of me needs some care and that part can get some care. But like this, I can manage on my own and like clean it up with the Lord and like get some healing and still bring them this thing that's not 10 times bigger, because I actually own what I needed to own and can bring them the one part that I do need some care for.
So then you realized I need to forgive them.
Forgave them, and then was like, I think part of my boundary is like, I'll need to leave at 9:30 now. So it might be awkward if someone's not there. I started setting alarms because I'd forget too. If it was like, oh, it's time for me to go. I suggested maybe that we do some walks. So we alternate now. We do some morning walks because not everyone's morning people, but I am. Then it's like kind of hard. So actually doing like, what could this work? And then being okay if it means that I go to one less, or I'm just not as, again, it's not like I have to subscribe to all the things that are on the calendar or do none of the things. Like no one actually was saying I was going to get kicked out, but that's my stakes. Like I follow all the rules, the rules that no one's actually enforcing, but it's Jenna being like, oh, I have to get kicked out otherwise. And then actually, I think even just sometimes like I'll say, like you said, the story I'm telling myself. If there's something that like I think all these signs point to they're believing this or this is what they mean, I'll own, like, can you help me? Like, I feel like if I go home at 9 before we're finished or I miss a group, the story I'm telling myself is that there won't be a place for me anymore. Like, can you speak to that in a way that's curious, in a way that's not blaming? And then it's like that part gets healed because a lot of times there's actual pain that is behind it. And then maybe it can get resolved. And then the boundary comes so naturally together versus like me deciding independly. And like,
and how did they feel and how did they respond?
Oh, they were so great. They literally were like, one of the other ladies was like, oh, I've been so tired too. And I would love a morning thing. And then someone else was like, mornings don't work for me. And then it was like, are we allowed to have different needs? And then it was like, so we just had an actual open conversation about how our needs had shifted in our season and that we can be okay. We have enough history that we can be okay with meeting less and it's still not needing to like break up or match the consistency. It was like it was a beautiful gray.
Like we can find a secret option C
that
works for all of us. We can negotiate instead of it being black or white.
And even I think like somebody said about taking the rejection out, like I'm not rejecting them, but they're not rejecting me in the negotiation, where it's actually like the goal is a win-win, not like I'm more powerful or I'm going to get hurt or booted out. So
I love that.
It's helpful to reframe it.
Yeah. Going back to the goal is a win-win. I don't think a lot of us have experienced exchanges where there's win-wins. There's just a winner and a loser. That happens in childhood. And then it perpetuates throughout our lives. Like someone has to lose here. Who's the one that has to lose? And so I think that that's an adjustment that we have to make in our process towards life in general.
Yeah.
There is a world where there's more than enough and people can get win-wins. It doesn't have to be all or nothing.
Yeah.
That's so good.
I go back to, I talked about this before, Danny still giving me the advice, like what is a yes you can give when you give a no? And so like maybe somebody in church saying like, hey, I'd love to get together with you for coffee and being like, in this season, I don't have a lot of capacity for that. But I come to church every week. I would love to talk with you after church for 10 minutes.
I literally have people that I sit with at church, and that's the only like slice that I have to give, but I have it to give.
Right.
Or I've started doing a lot more group things where I'm like, oh, acquaintances, sure, you can come to this park thing that happens. I'd truly love for you to be there.
Sure.
But you can't be in my small group, or there's not a one-on-one spot that I have. I kind of think of it like real estate. Like there's no more beachfront property. Like literally beachfront's taken. But do you want this apartment in the town center?
Yes.
Sure. But then too, like you're saying, sometimes people are offended. And if they walk away, that's okay with me. Because I actually offered them something. On some level, I could feel the rejection. Where like you're like, that's actually not what I'm looking for. If I don't get beachfront property,
I want
like,
nothing.
Oh, but like, it's okay. I'd rather find that out now and then go find someone also who like could meet that need for them. If I don't have that, like, great, go find that person.
Oh yeah. I think that negotiating is really tricky because most of our brains don't even think through other options. Do you have a couple other versions of how you've come up with creative strategies for people who want something from you and you can't give what they want, but other ideas that you've had to meet them?
Oh yeah. I've noticed, because even just like swinging from pendulums from one extreme to the other, when I had no boundaries and then I went to boundaries, I kind of avoided people who are high need for a while.
Yes.
Because that felt like conflict all the time. Because I'm gonna have to set, like, I'm gonna have to guard myself with
over
boundaries
and over and over again.
Yeah. So I like the idea of what do you have to give. I think even just now, I remember I was in the last like 2 years being like, oh, maybe I'm okay. Maybe I am safe enough in my body that I can be around someone who has high needs and I don't feel over responsible. And I like all those narratives that were actually a ton of judgment. Like, yes, maybe I was taught it, but I was agreeing with the judgments against myself, and that I've lost those judgments against myself. So it almost feels like I can sit with their needs.
Like you've lost your self-hatred and the inner critic voice of you should meet all of their needs.
Anything that they have a need, whether if it's financial or relational or inner healing, like I used to think honestly, on some level, it felt like if I heard it, I was responsible for it. So like, I wouldn't want to hear but then that made me the opposite of love. And I'm like, okay, this isn't actually winning either.
Well, and I just want to point out what you're saying, because our shoulds will lead us to avoidance. And the more you got rid of your shoulds, the more you could become love and move towards people. And so getting rid of the rules you had in your head about what it looks like to love people actually enabled you to love people.
It's so true. I think a lot of times we think of, and Justin even said this, like we prescribe what love looks like. And a lot of times, even with boundaries or relationships, it's very specific. Like when you look, like when you actually play the tape, like a good friend would throw a birthday party for your other friend, or a good daughter would get your mom $100 worth of a Mother's Day gift.
Right.
Like there are these arbitrary things that I think as I grew in self-awareness, actually just asking yourself, like, what do I think it would be a good mom? Why do I feel so stressed and want to run away from Mother's Day? And I'm like, because it's a bad mom if I give a present, but then I'm going to feel disappointed when I give her, this expensive of a present because her reaction, versus like, oh, what could I do that would be like the middle ground of that? So just really sitting with what could I do? I'll ask other people. I'll Google it. I'll decide I kind of play out like what would a $15 gift seem like for Mother's Day? What would sending it directly on Amazon, and even though I forgot, what would not apologizing for being late for a gift look like? So just even playing through the scenarios of like the different options is like super helpful for me.
Yeah.
I realized, we were talking about shoulds just a second ago there, and for me, when I got caught up in the shoulds, I would collapse in on myself. It wasn't just an avoidance. It was like I would just crumble internally. And the way that crumbling would look like is, again, it wasn't avoidance. It was just like I just couldn't respond. I couldn't respond to people because I had so many shoulds pulling me from all different directions. And then all of a sudden I get this like, I can't make a decision at all. And I'm just stuck. And that was a collapse in on myself. And I think that a lot of people can relate with the idea that they become paralyzed by all of it, by shoulds. And so again, when you pre-think about like, okay, if I'm getting rid of the shoulds out of my life and I'm actually looking, how do I want to show up? And I'm pre-thinking about what boundaries can I create and what kind of creative solutions can I bring to the situation, then you don't have to feel so paralyzed when everything comes at you.
So when you have needy people now that you're around, what kinds of boundaries and secret option C's do you do?
Wow. Yeah. Well, first off, I remember this really one distinct time when I had someone who had a lot of need and it was real in their life. There's emotional need, but real physical need. I actually called you at one point because I wanted to crawl out of my skin. Like I actually thought about running away. I had to like use my self-control to not leave. But in the past, I would have just been pointing at them.
Right.
Like they're so needy and so broken. This is happening. Versus inside of me, I was like what's
going on in me?
Yes, this
that
is not
I
normal,
feel
Jenna.
Unsafe.
Yes, like why do you want to run away? And then I realized that the more I listened, I felt responsible for everything they were saying to solve it. Therefore, run so that you won't get drowned by what they need. So then I actually sometimes if I'm having a big reaction when someone's having like needs, because a lot of times boundaries is like a negotiation of what they want and what you have to give. So like I just sit and I disassociate for a second if I'm feeling really triggered, and I'm like, what do I feel like right now? And at that point I was like, I feel like I'm 8 and I have to, anything that's told to me I have to do, and I'm responsible. So stop talking. Because I can't do all this. I can't help you. So then I like kind of talk to my like 8-year-old self, like, hey, you're an adult. What if?
Yeah.
This isn't the same as the house that you grew up in. Like, what if you could, winning right now is actually, maybe you're not able to like be super empathetic, but you can learn that you can be safe by just listening to the end until they're done. And then, so I just like do little benchmarks for myself because it's really not about them. So often the reaction that's happening inside of you
is about you.
It's so about you. And then like, okay. So then I learned that like, okay, like I think I used to think that like going back to like what they need and boundaries, what people say they need is actually like, or what I think the answer is, like, even if it's like a monetary need, like what they, so then my boundary is like, I don't have $200, I have $5. Yeah, that's something. But then another choice like F is, what if they actually need someone to just feel witness who checks up on them about that bill?
Yes.
And I don't be the one, I'm not the one who solves it for them. Because I actually kind of watched how often I was putting myself, not on purpose, but in the savior, like you with your
savior
mom,
role.
like, if it's not me, then who?
Yes.
It's my job because I know about it, versus like, oh, actually, I believe that you're bigger than me, God. And unless you're specifically tapping me, like, this isn't my job. And I'm trying to fill shoes that I could never fill. No wonder I feel suffocated. So I'm actually going to see, like, so I'd say, going back to your original question, creative options, witness, empathy, just checking in, voice memos, and then letting go of the should or the shame. Because a lot of times, if we don't do what we expect, like the $200 mother gift, we avoid entirely. So then I'm not calling my mom, and then I actually have made a mess.
Yes.
So a lot of times when I watch my should and me be able to not meet it, then I want to run away. I will like voice memo on purpose, be like, hey, it was your birthday, I hope it was wonderful. Sometimes I'll purposely not apologize, because that's my old reaction.
Fawning.
Yes, of fawning. So I'm like, I can like communicate empathy. I can, so I think through a ton. I actually like self-awareness, and then thinking through is like what helps me.
And a lot of,
I have a question for her.
Yeah. A lot of what you're doing is, what do I have to give? I don't have $200. I don't have every day to drive them to hospital appointments. I don't have the ability to watch their kids all the time. Yeah. But what I do have, and everybody's answer could be different. Oh, once a month I could bring them a meal, or or
drop off, like sometimes Walmart delivery people, like, oh, I would love to make you a homemade meal because I should. Yes. Like, it's this expectation of what love looks like. What if love is thoughtfulness? Where even think about the Samaritan, he paid for someone else to take care of him, you know? And then he left, and I'm like, oh, but I would say, come live with me, I'll take care of you. But like, oh, actually, like, there's so many different options of how love can look.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, you go for the question.
What would you say to someone? You talked about kind of when things become cataclysmic, like all of a sudden, you know, you didn't have the conversations, you didn't maybe give the gifts, whatever, and now all of a sudden they've made a big mess.
They have, or I have?
Say someone comes to you and they've made that big mess, right?
Okay. What do you mean they've made that big mess?
Like, they're mad at me?
Well, no. You were talking about I'm putting it into context of you would make a mess. You were talking about how I made a mess. What if someone came to you and said, I've made a mess because I don't know how to do boundaries? What is the advice that you'd give them in cleaning up those messes?
Okay, so this is great. I think a lot of times when all of a sudden we're aware, like, oh, I've missed it for 40 years. Now I'm going to go back. That's when we get the really, like, people.
And we get extreme. Boundaries.
Yes. Or even undoing so much mess. I'd probably sit with myself and be sorry that I betrayed myself for so long. Like, and that I didn't respect, like, kind of some self-repair of empathy. Like, oh my gosh, I have really unrealistic expectations for you for so long. I'm sorry. So I like go back to that. Like, I'm actually going to go on a journey of learning to create some safety and rebuild trust, that I'll listen to your capacity and not betray you just for other people's needs. And then I know it sounds so cliche, but I would eat an elephant one bite at a time. I would just start with the next time I can enforce a boundary. Because a lot of times,
a little boundary I can do, a little one the next time, and then another little
even
one.
If it's bigger, like, oh, okay, I know that they're probably going to do X because they do, you know, Y, and then X, I should have done X, Y, Z. I went backwards up the alphabet. So they're going to do this, and I know so well because we have 30 years of experience, this is going to happen and this is going to happen. I just have a plan for this. I'm going to treat this, and then when that happens, next time my boundary will include that. Next time my boundary, versus like when we try to unsolve 35 years of trauma and not having it usually blows up stuff, and it overwhelms, because you've thought about it.
The other
overwhelms the other person.
They have no idea, and they have no capacity to change all their habits at once.
Yes, and it's not fair that you haven't told them for 35 years. You know,
is there places that you think that it's a good idea to go to in certain situations and actually be like, you know, it's probably been difficult experiencing me. I've probably shut down in areas. I've probably not really fully communicated where I'm at on stuff. That's probably not been
like, have
fun
you taken
for you.
Ownership for where you didn't have boundaries?
Yes, I have. I think sometimes the only thing that I would run it through someone else to make sure you're taking ownership, because I've heard people do it in a way that's blaming and judgment.
Yes,
it's actually
totally.
thinly veiled judgment.
Yep.
You've probably noticed
I'm
I
so
can't
sorry
handle myself.
that I hate being around
Yes.
you.
Yeah.
Like I've realized that you overtalk and you dominate, and I have not said anything about that
Or
for
I
a long
shut down
time.
when you're terrible.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Totally.
like I think like testing it with someone, but yeah, there have been times that I'm like, oh my gosh, I've been passive aggressive and avoided, or I'm sorry I've avoided you. That was probably really confusing. I'm gonna grow in that. I'm learning. I don't expect them. I think when I come, if I know I've been thinking about something and they haven't, I don't expect them that they're going to show up perfectly.
Yeah.
Because I've been thinking about it for a week or two. So I'm like, this is probably, I also think like the one and done, it's probably going to be the first of a few adjustments in our relationship. And then figuring out what works, what doesn't work for them. I'm going to be more honest because I love you and want to care for our relationship.
Yeah. One of the things I'm hearing that I think is so good is you've kind of made peace that life is going to need boundaries in every relationship all of the time.
Yeah. I mean, isn't that real?
But that's not something I think most people have accepted.
They help your life thrive versus hindering. It's not keeping, it's actually enabled me to have all these thriving sections of my life, because then I can give, like you were saying, attention to everything versus the loudest squeaky wheel getting all of the watering, my nurturing, weeding. Sorry, kids, you don't get mom because this person is in crisis all the time. Like, that's not how I'm going to live. So yeah, just this awareness that it ensures, like getting back to that idea of you living out of your core values rather than having no boundaries. Like it actually supports. I almost think of like boundaries are like the trellis behind a plant versus like a cage. It supports life. It doesn't hinder it. But if you have nothing, like tomato plants can't hold the weight of their own fruit. So it like helps me hold the weight versus
hold the
hindering.
weight of your life.
Yeah.
Okay. Tell me what you do with this. Overtalkers. How do you handle overtalkers?
That's a good question. I'd probably balance it that we could be on a walk or do something not seated so I don't feel overwhelmed. I actually would, depends on my history, if I'm new with them or if I'm coming back, like, 30 years in and need to set something out, I would interject myself. Sometimes I will take up space and be like, can I share?
Yeah.
Like I'll actually be like, I have some thoughts. Like, can I have a turn? Not sassy, but actually give them a real, because a lot of times they're unaware that they're over talking. Or like, I'd love to, like, that happened to me too. Can I tell you about it? Or can I tell you about my life? Is it my turn? Like, not sassy. I know these sound really sassy.
No, those didn't.
No, it doesn't.
Okay,
No.
but like, so all of a sudden they're like, yes. And then sometimes they'll be so apologetic, or they're like, oh, you're right, I was talking. I want to hear. And then like, I'll have friends, because I can be that over talker. Let's be honest. Justin's shaking his head. He's like, yeah. So some of them,
I think you both can.
It's fair.
We'll say, and is it cool if can it be my turn?
Yes.
But this idea of like, I have the expectation that I want you to share and you want me to share. So I just come into over talkers, like assuming friendships that I want in my life want me to show up too. So there's got to be a space. Maybe you haven't learned what that space looks like, but I'll help you. I'll help make some space.
I love that. One of the things, we're about to wrap up, but I was just thinking about the analogy about our heart is the garden. And I was thinking, we often spend so much time trying to, I loved this thing, this meme I saw on Instagram the other day, and they were like, it's so funny that like, basically in life, a snake will bite us and we will spend years of our life trying to figure out why the snake bit us and what motives it could have had and what childhood it could have had, instead of actually taking care of the snake bite and just taking care of ourselves. And I think that's happens so often, where we spend so much energy.
Yeah.
I want to define them. I want to categorize them. Are they good or bad? Instead of taking care of me and like, what do I need to do? Like, I had a relationship where I was constantly feeling hurt by a behavior that they did. And I think everybody deserves a chance to talk through things. So I said, hey, this is hurting me. And they apologized and they're like, oh my gosh, I want to change. And we spent a few years talking through the behavior and then wanting to change. And then I was like, you're not going to change. Like, it's been a few years and I do appreciate that you're kind when I bring it up, but you're not going to change. So I either can villainize you and decide you are self-absorbed and this is why you're doing this. Or I can be like, oh, you're clearly showing me what you have capacity to give. I need to put you in a spot where I don't start to hate you. It's my job to guard how much hate I have towards people, how much resentment I have towards people, how much bitterness I have towards people. That's my heart territory. And if I'm letting somebody in to a place where they're hurting me all the time, I need to stop. We want to blame them because I'm like, if we decide they're bad enough, it's fine. We can break our rules of loving everyone enough to put a distance instead of being like, I love you, so I want to put you at a distance where I don't hate you.
Yeah.
I love you, so I want to put you in a place where I can enjoy what you do have to give.
Yeah.
But you're not close enough to me where you're hurting me all the time to do this.
That's so good. It's to kind of getting to that like radical ownership that you're talking about with what's going on inside of you. My daughter and I are reading a book about near-death experiences, like tons. It's
very
actually
cool.
fascinating. They did.
It's so good.
I was trying to compete her, like my husband's reading Harry Potter with her. So I was like, okay, all my Christian devotionals were so not cool. So I was like, I can bring some sci-fi and religion. So anyways, but in this one, it's so fast. They did like 3,000 like case studies and it's all different religions and stuff. And the thing that's the most common is this report at your end of your life, like a life review.
A life review.
Yeah, which I think is fascinating. But anyways, what the common question, it was interesting, it was like Buddhists and Hindu, like all these people, the common question that they felt asked by the big power was, did you learn to love? Like, did you learn to love well? And I had this moment where I was like kind of stewing on how someone had hurt me and like how they weren't loving me well. And I had just like this epiphany of like, at the end of my life, I am not going to be responsible for how any of those friends learned to love or didn't love, or my husband loved or didn't love me well, but actually like I am responsible for how I learned to love. So wouldn't my time be better spent as a pupil instead of a critic?
Yeah.
And it was like, I'm just going to be such a pupil of learning to love well. And that means learning like what's happening inside of me, because that's what I'm responsible for.
Well, and I was thinking about, even if we think about your thoughts as energy points, oftentimes we give all of our energy points to diagnosing or labeling other people instead of using our energy points to understand ourselves, to understand what's going on, and then to create solutions, that creative solution solving. I have way more energy to do creative solutions when I'm using my energy points in me than when I'm trying to spend them on diagnosing. And it's one of the things that I'm struggling with the emotional health realm right now, because so much is about labeling other people. And the whole concept of labeling other people is, again, so that you're allowed to have boundaries. And my thought is, whether you're good or bad doesn't matter. If you're hurting me all the time, or it's not feeling good, or I'm starting to have bad fruit grow when I'm around you,
or I'm just not liking it.
Like, you may be a great person and we just may not be like compatible to be the best friends. And so then it's that secret option C of, how do I find then the rhythm where it feels good?
I always think of like, oh, they have something epic. They're probably not going to be my best friend, but can I focus on like how well, I don't know, they do their job of trash collecting or something? Like, I'm like, I always rather spend more energy, like, what do you have to give, versus being so aware of what you don't, and then put you in that category. Like, this works really well for us. It's so true though. People do really label and then get so stuck. And then I feel sad because it's like, they've given their life energy. You know, those people like in shows that you like, that a crime happened to them and then you walk into their apartment and it's just mapping everything that person ever did. And you're like, oh, this took over, like that happened to you
a long time
ago. And this has become your whole life. That's what I feel like. I'm like, I actually want to go play. I care more about having, if you don't want to be in my life, having friends who do. I care more about having fun, like actually taking those energy points to build the life I want, rather than getting stuck on what was not my choice or not in my realm anymore. Like, it feels like such wasted energy.
That's really, just to say that was a really good image to relate it to that, of like in the crime show where that person has spent years ding, ding,
with
ding,
all the like red lines, you know?
Absolutely. All the years of
yeah.
that. I'm like, you got so consumed with it and you stopped living. Like, it wasn't just a moment that this person hurt you. It was the rest of your, like, all of the rest of this was stolen from you inside of this.
And that's what I think about. My little phrase for myself with offense is, offense never serves me. It actually steals from me. It feels like it's going to protect me, but it steals so much life from me. I'm like, oh, it paralyzes you.
It really does. And that offense is like that wall that we throw up that puts us in prison. It may keep them out, but it also keeps us in.
You now live in Fort Knox.
Yes. Yes. Well, Jenna is one of my favorite coaches. I bought sessions for friends from Jenna because she's brilliant at what she does. She's an ADHD. human who has, and I say that because there's so many ADHD people out there who need help creating habits. Everybody needs help creating habits, but the neurodivergent people that we have really need help
and
because habits
shame work at the same point. Because usually we feel so riddled with shame that we can't adult like other people can.
Yes.
So like getting that and then actually building the habits, the practical habits. Sorry, I'm talking about myself.
No, it's great. It's very true.
Very
and so
about
if that's something that you need help with figuring out, or if you're like overwhelmed all the time, you're like, I can't get my laundry done. How am I ever going to dream about relationships? How can I, like, if you're just feeling stuck in life, things feel too much for you. She leads so many groups that have been life transforming. So many of our master consultants have done it. They love it. They feel so empowered.
It's been so
their
fun
life.
getting overlap, meeting your master consultants. I'm like, oh, hey, Marcus. Hi, Jess.
Yes. So if you want to reach out to connect with her, you can find her on Instagram. Her name's Jenna Zint. You can also, her websites are
thehabitlab.org, or I have a podcast called The Habit Lab.
Wonderful. So I would definitely check those things out. And it's so good to have you here.
Thanks for chatting with me, guys.
Yeah, I think we might do one more on boundaries because there's just so much to say.
There's so many. Ooh, we should do like a Q&A maybe to get like pointed questions that we then do. Sorry, you're not responsible for doing this idea. There's no boundary protecting you from me.
We know that we have good boundaries, so we won't
true.
if we don't want to.
Fair. That is fair.
All right. Thank you guys for tuning in. Share this podcast with people so that they don't become a-holes when they're learning boundaries. And because honestly, some of the most incredible life transformation stories in entire families have happened because someone shared our podcast with them.
Yeah.
And then that was exactly what they needed. And then their whole family changed. We have so many stories like that. So share it with people, subscribe. Do you have anything else?
I'm going to go to bed.
Yeah, it's time to be done.
Me too.
We talked so much.
Long day.
Bye.
All right. Bye.